Jackson had always believed that war was a thing of the past. After years of serving as a soldier in the galactic forces, he retired to a quiet life on the distant planet of Arcturus 5. The bustling cities, the endless conflicts, and the alien species he once fought alongside seemed like a distant memory. His new life was peaceful, surrounded by a small farm and the calm of nature. He was content. Or at least, he tried to convince himself of that every day. He spent his mornings tending to crops, feeding the animals, and repairing his small ship, the Eagle's Rest. He didn't need much, just the simple things: peace, solitude, and the comfort of knowing that the galaxy was no longer his battlefield. Every now and then he would hear whispers of distant wars or planetary conflicts, but he chose to ignore them. The days of saving lives or fighting for the galaxy were long gone. One late evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jackson was on his porch, sipping a cup of coffee. He stared at the stars above, wondering about the other life forms out there, somewhere in the vast reaches of the universe. Maybe they were living the same quiet life as him, or perhaps they were still at war, still fighting for survival. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp, sudden sound of an incoming transmission. His old communication device, long unused, buzzed to life. Confused, he stepped inside and activated the screen. A holographic image flickered to life. It was a message, a distress signal. At first, Jackson thought it was a mistake or an automatic transmission, but as the static cleared, he saw her face. It was her. Lyra, the alien princess he had once saved, years ago during the war. He could hardly believe his eyes. Her message was brief, but the urgency in her voice was unmistakable. She was injured, stranded, and under attack. She was barely recognizable, her face pale, her features strained from pain, but it was definitely her. Lyra, the princess of the Kasari Empire, the same one he had saved from a brutal enemy force, the same one who had looked at him with gratitude in her eyes before disappearing into the distance, never to be seen again. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke. "Jackson, I need your help. I can't trust anyone else. They are after me. Please, come. I am on the moon Valrith in the Zagarian system. Time is running out." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Jackson in stunned silence. He hadn't thought about Lyra in years. She had been a symbol of everything he had fought for, and he had never imagined that he would see her again. Yet here she was, calling for him, and she was in danger. He sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. He had left that life behind. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was just Jackson, a farmer. But hearing her voice again stirred the danger. But when they were safe, she had disappeared into the shadows of the galaxy, never to contact him again until now. Now she needed him again. Jackson couldn't ignore that. It was the call of the past, one that had come to find him, and he knew that he couldn't leave her stranded. Not again. He set a course for the Zagarian system. The familiar hum of his ship's engines, a reminder that he was about to step back into a world he had left behind. The peaceful life he had built was about to be shattered, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a simple rescue mission. Something more was at stake. Something that Lyra wasn't telling him. Jackson looked out at the stars as the ship jumped into faster-than-light travel. The galaxy was vast, filled with mysteries and dangers, but for some reason he felt that the most important moment of his life was about to begin. He only hoped he could reach her in time. Jackson sat at the controls of his ship, the Eagle's Rest, watching the stars streak past as the ship entered faster-than-light travel. The hum of the engines was a comforting sound, but it didn't stop his mind from racing. He had left his peaceful life behind. Everything was about to change. He had no idea what kind of trouble Lyra had gotten into, or what exactly she needed from him, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was her only hope. The journey to the Zagarian system was long. Jackson sat alone in the cockpit, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The more he thought about the past, the more questions filled his mind. Why had she sent the message to him? Why not to one of her own people or a military force? Was it because she trusted him, or was there something more she wasn't saying? The memories of their last encounter flooded his mind. He had been just a soldier, and she had been a princess, a symbol of the Kasari Empire. He remembered her grace, her strength, and the way she carried herself, even in the chaos of battle. She had been different from the other high-ranking officials. She had never looked down on him, never treated him like he was just a tool to be used. They had shared a connection, even if neither of them fully understood it at the time. But that was years ago. The war had ended, and they had both moved on. Or at least, that's what Jackson had tried to convince himself of. Now, she needed Him again. He couldn't deny that something stirred inside him when he thought of her. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was duty. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something more. He pushed those thoughts aside. The mission was clear: find Lyra and bring her back to safety. He didn't have time for old feelings or wondering about things he couldn't change. Thus the Eagle's Rest continued its journey. Jackson ran over the mission in his mind. The Zegarian system was located on the outskirts of known space, a dangerous and often unpredictable region. It was home to rogue pirates, scavengers, and mercenaries who made their living by exploiting travelers. The planet Valrith, where Lyra had sent her distress signal from, was one of the last places anyone wanted to go. The planet was isolated, surrounded by asteroid fields and electromagnetic storms that made navigation tricky. It was also known for its lack of proper security. Anyone who ended up there was either hiding from something or trying to get lost. Jackson's hand tightened on the controls as he thought of the dangers that awaited him. He couldn't let Lyra down, but the thought of walking into a trap made his heart race. He wasn't the young soldier he once was. He had spent the last few years out of the fight, out of the game. Now he was stepping back into a world of danger and uncertainty. The galaxy had changed, and so had he. He checked the ship's systems, making sure everything was functioning properly. His mind drifted back to their last moments together. He had been part of a mission to extract important figures from a war, and Lyra had been one of the most critical. Their escape had been chaotic, with explosions and gunfire ringing in the air. He had saved her from certain death, but it wasn't just a mission to him. There had been something about her, something he couldn't explain, that had drawn him to her. That connection had haunted him ever since. The quiet life he'd built on Arcturus 5 hadn't been enough to erase the memory of her face, her voice, the way she had looked at him when he had pulled her to safety. It had been a brief moment, but it had left an imprint on him, one he couldn't forget. He shook his head, focusing again on the task at hand. Lyra needed him, and he couldn't afford to get distracted by the past. Hours passed as the ship continued its journey. Jackson kept his eyes fixed on the navigation screen, knowing that every moment brought him closer to the unknown. The stars outside the window seemed to stretch endlessly, the silence of space wrapping around him. It was the kind of silence he had longed for, the kind of peace he had fought for all those years. But now, the silence felt heavy, as if something was waiting just beyond the horizon. Eventually, the Zegarian system came into view. Jackson checked the coordinates Lyra had sent. Valrith was a small moon that orbited a gas giant. Its surface was mostly barren, with only a few mining colonies scattered across the landscape. There was little to offer except harsh conditions and isolation. It made sense why she would hide there, but it also made sense why someone would come after her. As Jackson neared Valrith, his heart began to pound. The communications signal had been faint, barely making it through the interference of the system. She had been desperate, but wow, much she had to lose. If something had happened to her, if she was already gone, he would never forgive himself. He landed the ship as carefully as he could, knowing the harsh conditions would make the landing tricky. The ship's wheels touched the rocky ground with a soft thud, and Jackson took a deep breath. He was here now. All he had to do was find her. But as he stepped out into the cold, his heart raced not just with fear, but with a sense of duty he hadn't felt in years. The cold air of Valrith bit into Jackson's skin as he stepped off. The Eagle's Rest. The landscape around him was barren, a harsh reminder of how little hope there was on this forsaken moon. The ground was rocky, scattered with large craters that made navigating difficult. The sky above was a dark shade of purple, with the faint glow of the gas giant looming in the distance, casting an eerie light across the planet's surface. Jackson took a moment to scan the horizon, his heart pounding in his chest. His boots crunk. Head softly on the dry soil as he approached the small abandoned outpost where Lyra's distress signal had originated. There was no sign of life, only the remnants of a once functioning facility, now stripped of anything valuable. The walls were cracked, and rust had taken over the metal structures, giving it a decaying appearance. He cautiously moved forward, staying alert. His training from years as a soldier never fully left him, and he knew to expect the worst in situations like this. The quiet of the barren moon felt suffocating. Every step felt heavier, the silence growing more unnerving. As he made his way through the wreckage, Jackson's thoughts wandered back to his past with Lyra. He had never expected to see her again. After the battle that nearly cost them both their lives, she had vanished from his world. She was a princess, far removed from the life of a soldier like him. Yet, something had always connected them, a silent understanding between them. That moment of saving her, pulling her from the wreckage, had changed him. He had never fully shaken the feeling of responsibility for her even after the war ended. Now, here he was again, hunting for answers. Hunting for her. Jackson rounded the corner of the building, and then he saw the faint glow of a hidden entry. A small door, partially open, with signs of damage from what appeared to be a struggle. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be her? Was she still alive? Without hesitating, he approached the door and pushed it open carefully. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by the flickering light of a small, broken terminal. The walls were covered in dust and debris, but there, lying in the corner, was the figure of a woman, fragile, breathing heavily, but still alive. "Lyra," Jackson whispered, his voice filled with both relief and concern. She turned her head at the sound of his voice. Her face was pale, and there were bruises and cuts across her skin. Her eyes, though tired, locked onto his with recognition. Despite the pain she must have been feeling, she managed a weak smile. "Jackson," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I knew you would come." Jackson rushed to her side, kneeling down beside her. His hands were shaking as he reached for her, carefully lifting her up into a sitting position. Her breathing was shallow and her clothes were torn. She looked like she had been through hell. I don't know how to thank you," Lyra continued, her voice weak. I thought I was going to die here." "Don't try to talk," Jackson said gently, pulling out a medkit from his bag. He quickly began to clean her wounds and bandage them as best as he could. "You're going to be all right." "I'm not going anywhere." Lyra winced as he touched a particularly deep cut on her arm, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, seemingly grateful for his presence. "I never thought I would see you again," she said after a moment, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been running for so long, Jackson. I didn't know who to trust anymore. The people I thought I could count on betrayed me." Double quotes. Jackson stopped what he was doing and looked at her. He couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He had left her behind once, choosing to walk away from the chaos. He had chosen peace over the fight. But now, here she was, stranded and alone, and he couldn't turn his back on her again. "You don't have to explain anything," Jackson said softly. "Just rest. We'll figure this out together." Lyra seemed to relax a little, her shoulders slumping as the tension left her body. Jackson helped her lie back down on the floor, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. Her eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion overwhelming her. For a moment Jackson thought she might fall asleep, but then she spoke again. "Jackson," she whispered, "I need to tell you why I contacted you. I didn't just need help. I'm in more danger than you realize. The people who attacked me, they want something I can't let them have." The fate of an entire empire rested in her hands, and she was on the run, fighting for survival. "You're telling me they want to use you as a weapon?" Jackson asked, his voice low. Lyra nodded weakly. "I never asked for this responsibility. I never wanted the throne, but it's mine now, and they'll do anything to make sure I don't live to see it." Jackson felt a sense of dread wash over him. He hadn't expected this. This was no longer just about saving an injured princess. This was about the future of a whole empire, and Jackson had just been pulled into it, whether he wanted to be or not. "I'll protect you," Jackson promised, his voice firm. "We'll figure this out. You won't face this alone." Lyra looked at him, her expression softening. "Thank you," she whispered, closing her eyes again. "You don't know how much that means to me." Jackson sat there for a moment, watching over her, knowing the journey ahead would be far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. But for now, he had to focus on getting her to safety. One step at a time. The air inside the small outpost was thick with silence as Jackson sat beside Lyra, watching her rest. The moon's cold atmosphere pressed against the walls of the building, and the dim lights flickered every now and then, casting long shadows across the room. Jackson had never expected to find himself here, on this forgotten moon, nursing an injured alien princess back to health. Everything about this situation felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, as Lyra slept. Jackson couldn't stop thinking about their past. It seemed like another lifetime ago when they had first met. Back then, he had been nothing more than a soldier, following orders without question. Lyra had been the princess of a powerful empire, her life full of duty and expectations. She had been a symbol of strength and grace, but behind that facade, Jackson knew there was more to her than anyone could see. He had seen it when they fought side by side, when she had trusted him with her life. Their time together during the war had been brief, yet unforgettable. He had saved her from certain death in a battle that had almost cost them both their lives. In that moment, she had looked at him with gratitude, and there had been a spark between them, a connection neither of them had fully understood. It had been fleeting, but it had left its mark on Jackson. After the war ended, he tried to move on, to bury the memories of that time. He had left the military, finding peace on a quiet farm, far from the chaos of the galaxy. But now, here he was again pulled back into the fight by Lyra's call for help. Against them. After they had escaped, they had been forced to separate. Jackson had stayed behind, helping to secure the rest of the evacuees, while Lyra had disappeared into the shadows of the galaxy, leaving him with only memories. They hadn't exchanged words since that day. There had been no goodbyes, no closure. It was as if their paths had crossed for a brief moment, and then the galaxy had taken them in different directions. But now, here she was again, and the galaxy had once more thrown them together. Lyra's bloodline, the very thing that made her a target, was the key to the Empire's future. Jackson couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they failed to protect her. If the enemy got their hands on her, would the entire Khazari Empire fall? A soft groan broke Jackson from his thoughts. He turned to see Lyra stirring in her sleep, her brow furrowed in pain. He quickly moved to her side, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice soft. Her eyes fluttered, open, and she looked up at him, her gaze hazy but focused. "Jackson, she murmured. "I didn't mean to fall asleep, I didn't want to worry you." "Don't worry about me," Jackson said, offering a reassuring smile. "You need to rest. You've been through a lot." Lyra sighed, closing her eyes for a moment before speaking again. "I didn't want to drag you back into this. You deserve to live in peace. I've been running for so long, hiding from my past, and now, I've brought you into it." Jackson shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Lyra. I made my choice when I decided to help you that day. I've never regretted it. You didn't bring me into anything. I chose to be here." Her eyes met his, filled with gratitude and something else in emotion Jackson couldn't quite place. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid of what they'll do if they find me. I'm afraid of what they'll do to you." Jackson took her hand gently in his. "We'll face it together. Whatever happens, I'll protect you, I promise." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jackson could see the weight of her words, the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just her empire at stake, it was her life. And now, somehow, it had become his fight too. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened slightly. "I never wanted this, Jackson. I never wanted to be the last of my family. I never wanted to be their target." "I know," Jackson replied softly, "but you're not alone in this. I'm with you, and we'll find a way to stop them." Lyra looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd arrived, there was a spark of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Jackson the strength he needed to keep going. The path ahead was uncertain, and the enemies they faced were powerful. But one thing was clear. Jackson wouldn't let her face this alone. As the moon's cold wind howled outside, Jackson stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the desolate landscape. The darkness of space stretched endlessly before him, but for the first time since he had arrived on Valrith, he felt a sense of purpose. He was here to protect Lyra, to ensure her safety, no matter what it took. And whatever the galaxy had in store for them, they would face it together. The following morning, Jackson sat in the cockpit of the Eagle's Rest, staring out into the distance. The harsh winds of Valrith howled against the walls of the ship, but inside, it was quiet. Lyra had finally fallen into a deeper sleep after their talk the night before. Her body needed rest, and Jackson could see how much it had taken out of her just to stay awake for a little while. Jackson checked the ship's systems once more. His thoughts were racing. Everything was more dangerous now. Lyra had revealed just how much was at stake, not just for her, but for the entire Khazari Empire. She was no longer just a princess. She was the key to everything. If the enemy got their hands on her, the whole galaxy could be thrown into chaos. He couldn't let that happen. He had to protect her, but the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The enemy wasn't far behind. He could feel it in his gut. They were coming for Lyra, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Jackson stood up, running a hand through his hair. He couldn't sit idle. They needed to leave Valrith immediately. The longer they stayed, the greater the chance of someone finding them. He had to make a decision, and it had to be quick. He activated the ship's comms and sent a message to the one person he trusted, Mikhail, an old friend and fellow soldier who owed him a favor. Mikhail was stationed at a nearby outpost, and Jackson hoped he could provide some help. They needed more than just a safe place to hide. They needed allies, and Mikhail had connections that could help them. After sending the message, Jackson returned to the cargo hold where Lyra was resting. She had been awake for a while, sitting up against the wall, her face pale but determined. "Lyra, we need to move." Jackson said, his voice firm. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes tired but sharp. I know, she said quietly. I can't stay here. But where do we go? We have a contact, someone I trust. Mikhail will help us, but we have to move fast. Jackson could see the doubt in her eyes. She had been running for so long, always hiding, always looking over her shoulder. The thought of trusting someone else, even someone Jackson trusted, was difficult for her. She had been betrayed before, and she wasn't sure who she could rely on anymore. I don't want to put you in danger, Lyra said softly. You've already done so much for me, you don't have to keep going. Jackson shook his head. This isn't just about you, Lyra, it's about stopping whatever they have planned. We're in this together now, and we'll finish it together. She met his gaze, and for the first time since their reunion, Jackson saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He could see that she was beginning to believe in the possibility of a future, something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for in a long time. We'll need to move quickly, Jackson said. They could be closing in any moment. Lyra nodded, her face hardening with resolve. She stood up slowly, testing her balance before moving toward the ship's door. Let's go. Then they moved quickly, securing everything inside the ship before taking off. Jackson set a course for Mikhail's outpost, trying to keep his thoughts focused. The sooner they got there, the better. The trip would take a few hours, and the entire time, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As the Eagle's Rest flew deeper into space, Jackson checked the radar and the ship's sensors, looking for any signs of movement. The Zagarian system was vast and dangerous, with many ships passing through, but Jackson had a sinking feeling that someone was following them. The thought made his skin crawl. Lyra, sitting quietly beside him, seemed lost in thought. She hadn't spoken much since they had decided to leave. Jackson knew she had a lot on her mind. The weight of the galaxy was on her shoulders, and he could feel the pressure of that responsibility on his own chest. He had never expected his life to be like this, running, hiding, fighting to protect someone he barely knew years ago. But here they were, both in the same fight, and neither of them could afford to lose. Jackson, Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. Do you think they'll stop? Do you think I'll ever be safe again? Jackson glanced at her, his expression softening. I don't know, he admitted, but I'll keep fighting until we find a way. We won't stop until you're safe. Lyra was silent for a moment, looking out the window at the stars. I used to believe that the universe had a place for everyone, she said quietly, that if we just kept going, things would work out. But now, it feels like everything is falling apart. We're still here, Jackson said gently. That's all that matters. As long as we're still breathing, we can fight. Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes hardening with determination. Then let's fight. Suddenly, the ship's radar beeped, breaking their moment of quiet. Jackson's eyes flicked to the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. A ship had appeared on the radar, and it was moving fast. Too fast. They're here, Jackson said, his voice tight with urgency. Hold on. The ship on the radar was closing in quickly, and Jackson knew they had no time to waste. He pushed the controls forward, urging the Eagle's Rest to move faster. The ship lurched as it accelerated, but the other vessel was gaining on them. Lyra's hand gripped the edge of the seat as she glanced at the radar. They're closing in, she said, her voice tinged with fear. We'll outrun them, Jackson said, though he knew that wasn't necessarily true. The other ship had more firepower, and they were running out of options. He had to think fast. We need to lose them, Jackson muttered, a plan forming in his mind. Hang on. With a sharp turn, he sent the ship into a dive, weaving through the asteroid field nearby. The ship shook as they maneuvered, but Jackson kept his focus, his hands steady on the controls. Every second counted. As the ship descended deeper into the field, Jackson's heart raced. He wasn't sure they would make it, but they had to try. The enemy ship was still close behind, and there was no turning back now. The ship trembled as Jackson pushed the Eagle's Rest through the asteroid field, weaving between large rocks and dodging smaller debris. His hands gripped the controls tightly, trying to keep the ship steady as it raced through the narrow gaps in the field. The enemy ship was still behind them, but Jackson wasn't sure for how long they could keep up the pace. The asteroid field offered some cover, but it also made the journey more dangerous. Jackson, they're still following, Lyra said, her voice tense. She had been watching the radar, her eyes narrowing as the enemy ship remained locked on their trail. They won't give up that easily. Jackson didn't respond. His focus was on the ship's controls, but his mind was working quickly. The enemy ship was faster, more powerful, and they knew they couldn't outrun it forever. He needed a plan, a way to stop them before they got too close. but the clock was ticking, and he could feel the pressure mounting. "We have to make it to Mikhail's outpost," Jackson said finally, his voice low. "We'll have to fight them off there. He's expecting us." "Do you think we'll make it in time?" Lyra asked, her voice full of worry. "They're getting closer." "I'm not sure," Jackson admitted, his eyes flicking to the rear view. The enemy ship was close now, too close. It was gaining on them with every second, and Jackson could see the weapons systems lighting up on the radar. "We'll fight if we have to. Mikhail won't be far, we just have to hold out a little longer." The sound of the enemy ship's weapons charging reached their ears, sending a chill down Jackson's spine. He knew what was coming. If they were caught, it wouldn't just be a fight for survival, it would be a battle to protect Lyra and everything she represented. The enemy didn't just want her dead, they wanted to use her, and Jackson wouldn't let that happen. "Hold on," Jackson said, his voice firm. "I'm going to try something." With a quick twist of the controls, Jackson sent the Eagle's Rest into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a large asteroid. The ship groaned under the strain, but Jackson pushed it to the limit, hoping to shake off their pursuers. His heart pounded in his chest as he glanced back at the radar. The enemy ship was still on their tail, but now, it had to navigate the asteroid field as well. "Do you think it'll work?" Lyra asked, her eyes wide with concern as she looked at the radar. "Our best shot," Jackson replied, his voice steady despite the rising tension. He knew the asteroid field was their only chance to escape, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. The enemy ship was skilled at navigating rough terrain, and if they didn't get to Mikhail soon, the battle would be inevitable for a moment. It seemed like they had gained a little distance, the enemy ship slowing down as it tried to avoid the obstacles in the field. Jackson pushed the ship faster, taking more risks as he darted through narrow gaps between the rocks. But just as he thought they might have a chance, a bright flash of light filled the cockpit. The enemy ship had fired. The blast shook the Eagle's Rest, and Jackson's heart skipped a beat. The ship veered to the left, the control panel flashing red with warning lights. They had been hit. Lyra shouted, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Jackson replied quickly, his voice sharp as he worked to stabilize the ship. "The shields are holding, but we can't take another hit like that." The enemy ship fired again, the blast narrowly missing them but still rocking the ship. Jackson gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on the controls. He could feel the pressure building, knowing they didn't have much time left. They needed Mikhail, and they needed him fast. "Hold on," Jackson muttered to himself, swerving the ship to avoid another attack. The enemy was relentless, and with every second, they were getting closer. Jackson's mind raced as he calculated their options. He knew Mikhail's outpost was nearby, but the chances of making it there without further damage were slim. "I'll get us there, Lyra," Jackson said through gritted teeth. "Just trust me." Lyra nodded, her face set with determination. "I'm not giving up. We've come this far." Just as Jackson thought they were about to make a break for it, the ship shook again, this time more violently. The enemy ship had hit them directly, and the hull groaned under the impact. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit, and Jackson heard the hum of the ship's systems struggling to keep up with the damage. "We need to land now," Jackson said urgently, knowing they couldn't afford to keep flying much longer. "I'm taking us down. Hold tight." Jackson steered the ship toward the surface of Valrith, aiming for a small valley he had spotted earlier. It was the only place they could land safely, away from the enemy's sight. As they descended, the ship jolted again, and Jackson's heart raced. They were running out of time. With a final push, the Eagle's Rest slammed onto the rocky surface of Valrith, the landing gear scraping against the ground as it skidded to a stop. The ship's engines whined and sputtered, but they had made it. For now, they were safe. "We're down," Jackson said, taking a deep breath. "But it's not over yet." Lyra looked at him, her face filled with relief and worry. "What now?" "We wait for Mikhail," Jackson said, his voice low. "We stay hidden, and we prepare for whatever comes next." They both knew the battle wasn't over. The enemy would be looking for them, and the fight for Lyra's safety was far from finished. But for now, they had made it to the surface, and that small victory gave them a brief moment of peace before the real challenge began. Jackson took a deep breath as he watched the distant horizon through the small window of the ship. The Eagle's Rest had landed safely, but the calm didn't last long. Their ship was damaged, the enemy was close, and they were stranded on a barren moon with nowhere to hide. The only thing they had now was time, precious, fleeting time that was quickly running out. Lyra had been silent since their rough landing. She sat in the corner, her body weak but her mind alert. Jackson could tell she was worried, and he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She had been running for so long, never knowing where her next hiding spot would be. And now, here she was, with Jackson her protector and her last hope. Jackson glanced at her, trying to keep his calm, despite the tension that hung in the air. "We'll be fine," he said, though even he wasn't entirely sure of the truth in his words. "Mikhail will be here soon, he'll know what to do." Lyra looked up, her face set in a hard line. "I've heard that before," she said softly, her voice filled with exhaustion. "People who promised to help me, and then left me when things got hard." Jackson's chest tightened at her words. He knew what she meant. Lyra had been betrayed by those closest to her, and that kind of hurt left deep scars. He understood her distrust, but he also knew that Mikhail was different. Mikhail was a soldier who valued loyalty, someone Jackson had fought beside in the past. If anyone could help them now, it was him. But as much as he wanted to believe that Mikhail's arrival would solve everything, Jackson couldn't ignore the reality. The enemy was relentless. They were after Lyra, and they wouldn't stop until they had her. "They're not giving up," Jackson said, turning his gaze toward the cockpit. "We can't just wait for Mikhail, we have to do something." Lyra stood slowly, her face pale but determined. "I don't want to run anymore, Jackson," she said, her voice firm. "I don't want to keep hiding. I can't live my life like this anymore." Jackson felt a surge of sympathy for her. He understood how she felt. The constant fear of being hunted, of never knowing who to trust, had to be unbearable. He had seen the way she carried the weight of the Empire's future on her shoulders. It was too much for one person to bear alone. "We can't just sit here and wait," Lyra continued, her eyes meeting his. "We have to fight back. If we don't, they'll keep coming after me, and the Empire will fall. I can't let that happen." Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always been a soldier, but the stakes had never been this high. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about standing up, making a choice, and fighting for something worth protecting. "I'm with you," Jackson said, his voice steady. "But we need to be smart about this. We don't have the firepower to go toe-to-toe with them, not without Mikhail's help." Lyra's expression softened, but the determination in her eyes didn't fade. "Then we wait for Mikhail. But when he gets here, we fight. We fight for the future of the Kasari Empire. We fight for everyone who's depending on me." Jackson felt his heart race as the reality of their situation settled in. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a battle for freedom for Lyra, for the people of the Khazari Empire, and for the galaxy. And it would take everything they had to win. "We'll make it through this," Jackson said, his voice firm. "Together." Lyra gave him a small nod, a flicker of hope in her eyes. They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were enemies closing in, the odds stacked against them, and danger at every turn. But for the first time in a long time, Jackson felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about protecting one person anymore. This was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. Just as Jackson turned to check the ship's systems, once again a sudden noise from outside broke the stillness. His head snapped toward the door. The familiar sound of a ship's engines echoed in the distance. Mikhail had arrived. Jackson's heart surged with relief. It wasn't over yet, but they had a chance. Mikhail's ship appeared through the clouds of dust, landing gracefully near the damaged Eagle's Rest. The door opened, and Mikhail stepped out tall, rugged, and unmistakably ready for a fight. "Mikhail," Jackson called, his voice full of relief as he approached the man. "Jackson." Mikhail responded with a nod, his gaze quickly shifting to Lyra. His eyes softened slightly as he recognized the princess. "I've heard a lot about you, Lyra. Glad to see you're still standing." Lyra gave him a tight smile, though it was clear that she was grateful. "Thanks for coming." Mikhail didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice low. "The enemy is closing in. I have a plan, but we need to move fast." Jackson nodded, his focus sharp. "Lead the way." Mikhail motioned for them to follow him. "We need to secure your position here. The enemy's too close, and they'll be sending reinforcements soon. We can't let them get you, Lyra. It's time to take the fight to them." As Mikhail laid out his plan, Jackson felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. They were going to fight. They were going to take a stand, and they weren't going to back down. Lyra's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Jackson, I want to make one thing clear," she said, her eyes locked on his. "Whatever happens next, we stand together, no matter the cost." Jackson met her gaze, his heart full of resolve. "Together," he repeated. For the first time since they had arrived on Valrith, Jackson felt a sense of certainty. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of something bigger. A fight for their future, and the future of the galaxy, and he wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever.